The IRS is sending out the third round of stimulus checks. Around 8 million fewer Americans qualify for this round. And now that the massive stimulus package has been signed into law, the House is introducing its next massive project, the infrastructure bill. Also numbering in the trillions, it would tackle clean energy, roads and bridges, and changing the power sector, among other ambitious goals. And the controversial voting election reform package HR1, or For the People's Act, would overhaul the election system. It would violate the same-day clause in the Constitution. What is it, and how would HR1 change it? Tune into Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. The IRS is processing the third round of stimulus checks. The commissioner said in a statement the payments will be delivered automatically to taxpayers, even as the IRS continues delivering regular tax refunds. Around 85% of Americans qualify for this round of stimulus checks. People can start checking the IRS website Monday or today to check the status of their stimulus. This third round of stimulus cuts off for individuals earning over $80,000 a year and married couples making over $160,000 a year. That means, according to an estimate by the Institute of Taxation and Economic Policy, 8 million people don't make the cut this time. Biden and his cabinet officials are planning to go on tour to celebrate the passage of the $1.9 trillion relief package. Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris will travel to Georgia as part of the tour. This package is the first pandemic relief measure not passed with bipartisan support in Congress. No Republicans voted for it, arguing that only 9% is going towards fighting the pandemic. The bill mostly reflects Biden's legislative proposal. Some areas of the package include the biggest expansion of Obamacare in a decade, as well as an increase in refundable child tax credit, which has some experts worried it would actually increase welfare dependence and hurt society. And over the weekend, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says the next big package is in the works. It's the $2 trillion infrastructure bill. She called it big, bold, and transformational. Pelosi went on to note, building our transportation system has long been bipartisan, adding it is our hope that spirit will prevail as we address other critical needs in energy and broadband, education and housing, water systems, and other priorities. Biden campaigned on the message of unity, that he could work across both aisles. But critics note the hyper-partisan passage of the $1.9 trillion virus bill has put a dent in that message. Biden's lofty goals for infrastructure date back to his campaign days, when he called for $2 trillion to build a more resilient, sustainable economy. Among the investments are infrastructure such as roads and bridges, creating 1 million new jobs in the car industry, creating zero-emissions public transportation options, changing the power sector to be carbon-free by 2035, upgrading 4 million buildings and weatherizing 2 million homes over 4 years, constructing 1.5 million sustainable homes, and creating jobs in climate-smart agriculture. So what's the cost? According to a Goldman Sachs report, the infrastructure legislation should increase spending by $2 trillion. But Goldman analysts say that could go up to $4 trillion if the bill expands other areas, like child care benefits or student debt relief. So where is the money coming from? Representative John Garamendi says Biden is considering raising taxes as a way to pay for the infrastructure plan, but didn't provide specifics on taxes, nor on the overall cost of the package. Pelosi says she hopes the measure would address transportation as well as other critical needs in energy and broadband, education and housing, water systems, and other priorities. But the bill is already facing pushback from both sides of the aisle. Senator Joe Manchin told Axios last week he would only support a bill as large as $4 trillion if it's funded with tax hikes, adding he'll only support it if there is Republican support. He noted the $1.9 trillion stimulus bill could have won some Republican backing if just a few concessions had been made. So when is the bill's deadline? According to Director of Legislative Affairs at Associated Builders and Contractors, Peter Comstock, it's likely to be this September. Now, speaking of big and bold legislation, let's touch on HR1, or For the People's Act. The nearly 800-page controversial election reform package seeks to impose countrywide requirements on voting procedures, such as mandating automatic voter registration and making it legal for mail-in voting across the whole country without the need to provide photo ID to get an absentee ballot. Democrats tout it as pro-democratic and anti-corruption and have dubbed it For the People's Act. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy countered by calling it For the Politicians Act. So what other areas are sparking controversy under the bill? The election laws that would change include giving the federal government authority to run elections, taking it away from states. Democrats have interpreted the Constitution this way, saying in HR1, quote, Congress finds that it has broad authority to regulate the time, place, and manner of congressional elections under the Elections Clause of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 4. 20 Republican attorneys general raised concerns of that reading. In a letter to the leaders of the U.S. House and Senate, they note that under the U.S. Constitution, control of presidential elections falls to state legislatures. They write the act would invert that constitutional structure, commandeer state resources, confuse and muddle elections procedures, and erode faith in our elections and systems of governance. They added, accordingly, members of Congress may wish to consider the act's constitutional vulnerabilities, as well as the policy critiques of state officials. According to the letter, a number of other provisions in the bill also appear to contradict the Constitution, such as requiring states to accept late ballots, overriding state voter identification laws, and mandating states conduct redistricting through unelected commissions. They go on to say, despite recent calls for political unity, the act takes a one-sided approach to governing and usurps states' authority over elections. With confidence in elections at a record low, the country's focus should be on building trust in the electoral process. Other changes under HR1 mandates early voting. States would be required to allow anyone to cast a ballot during an early voting period prior to the date of the election. Currently, each state decides if it wants to have early voting, and if so, for how many days. It also would legalize nationwide mail-in voting without photo ID. Absentee voting by mail would be allowed in all federal elections and may not require an individual to provide any form of identification as a condition of obtaining an absentee ballot. A witness signature would not be required. HR1 would also mandate that states make absentee voter boxes available for 45 days within an election. Drop boxes would be made available for individuals to drop off absentee ballots for federal elections at any time, 24 hours a day during the voting period. It would also require states to redraw congressional districts through independent commissions, taking power away from state legislatures, and require states to accept ballots 10 days after the election day. States would be required to accept any mailed ballots postmarked before or on election day that arrive within 10 days of the election. The bill allows states to expand that deadline. That would be a violation of the same-day clause in the Constitution. So what's the same-day clause? Under the Constitution, there is a provision called the same-day clause or presidential vote clause. Article 2, Section 1 states, the Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors and the day on which they shall give their votes, which day shall be the same throughout the United States. It grants Congress two powers. Firstly, Congress may name a single day when all presidential electors vote, U.S. Code Title 3, Section 7. And secondly, Congress may fix the time we choose presidential electors, that is, when we all go to the polls. The singular form of time tells us that the time Congress selects must be the same nationwide. U.S. Code Title 3, Section 1 states, the electors of President and Vice President shall be appointed in each state on the Tuesday next after the first Monday in November, and every fourth year succeeding every election of a President and Vice President. It means the electors should only be chosen on this day. U.S. Code Title 3, Section 2 states, whenever any state has held an election for the purpose of choosing electors and has failed to make a choice on the day prescribed by law, the electors may be appointed on a subsequent day in such a manner as the legislature of such state may direct. That means when a state fails to choose its electors on Election Day, the state legislature may appoint electors. For example, in 2020, the 7 states that failed to announce a winner on Election Day, their state legislatures should have appointed the electors, if they had actually followed the Constitution. So what did the founders say at the Constitutional Convention? The provision was to give each presidential candidate the right to have electors meet on the same day and at widely separate locations so as to prevent corruption or collusion among electors. Richard Dobbs Spate, a delegate from North Carolina who later served as governor, said the time for choosing the electors was to be determined by Congress for the sake of regularity and uniformity, that if the states were to determine it, one might appoint it at one day and another at another, etc., and that the election being on the same day in all the states would prevent a combination between the electors. In this way, it is important to have the electors cast their votes on the same day. James Wilson, a delegate from Pennsylvania, said, "By it, we avoid corruption, and we are little exposed to the lesser evils of party intrigue." The Constitution was the same view has directed that the day on which the electors shall give their votes shall be the same throughout the United States. With this regulation, it will not be easy to corrupt the electors, and there will be little time or opportunity for tumult or intrigue. So what are the problems of an extended voting period? Candidates can give early voters one message and later voters a different message. It can arise near the end of an extended election if only a critical few haven't cast their ballots. Campaigns have incentives to bribe or intimidate the remaining few. Independent poll watchers find it much more difficult to monitor extended elections than same-day elections. Early and late voters have different information. So, for example, knowing about Hunter Biden's scandal versus people who already voted when the news came out. And over the period of an extended election, the personnel administering it may change. Even if this does not happen, officials may alter their practices or otherwise treat earlier and later voters differently. People might be able to cast ballots in more than one state. So now let's take a moment to look at what the Founding Fathers said about the election process. Abraham Lincoln once said, "America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves." John Adams once said, "You will never know how much it has cost my generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make a good use of it." And Thomas Jefferson once said, "I predict future happiness for Americans if they can prevent the government from wasting the labors of the people under the pretense of taking care of them." But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.